I choose you for the earth. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video, we are going to be talking about the Runelords series, at least the first arc, which is the first 4 books by David Farland. Now, right now, I actually don't have books 1 or 2. This is such a weird series because I originally got book 4. You can still see the sticker at a sale at a public library near me years ago, and then I moved away and moved back, and now I have the same library. But I originally got this just because, cover art got me. I was curious, and I had it for so many years, and then so finally I had a good reason to read it when T from An Erudite Adventure talked about it too, and he remembered hearing it from me, and I'm like, I might have mentioned it at some point, and we both were like, well, you know what, we want to read it, and so we jumped in to do a read-along. And over time, I have found, this is books 3 and 4, and I have also found 5, 6, and 7, but not 1, 2, and 8. So I've ordered 1, 2, and 8 at this point to complete the beginning and the end of the collection. But I wanted to talk about this series because I've read the first 4 books so far, and that really is the end of the first major arc. Book 5, it sounds like, starts out with kind of next generation of characters. It's mostly new characters. I imagine there's going to be some that are still around as well, because I don't think it's going to take place like that far after. But there's some in-world mechanics that make some things a little more final as well. So we'll get into that a bit. This is going to be spoiler-free, by the way, at this point, if I decide to do spoilers or say something. But yeah, so it's kind of there. So this is kind of the end of the first arc. And this series is one I've just been pretty fascinated with, and I've been enjoying my time through. It's one of those where it's like, it's not a new favorite, but it is definitely a very enjoyable series. One that just has introduced so many really, really interesting elements that are fun to talk about. Now, the big thing, too, I did a review for the first book and I talked about is, in the world, the Runelords are people who use endowments, which is a way using a special type of blood metal that you use to take an attribute from somebody and then give it to yourself. Now, there are a lot of rules with how this works. They have to be completely willing to give you the magic. So you can't actually steal one, although you could, kind of force somebody into it, by threatening them or something so that they decide to. But they have to willingly do it. If somebody absolutely refuses, they can't be forced to give an endowment. So an interesting part there. But so there's so many things that you can do with that, because endowments include things like metabolism, which basically makes you live faster. So like you age quicker, but you can also move much faster, and time kind of seems almost like it slows down around you, because kind of like you're actually like going a bit faster than everyone else. There's everything from voice, which can make your voice more powerful, which can have more effects the more you get, to glamour, which, makes you more like beautiful, makes it easier for you to convince people to do things you want, to things like strength and all kinds of things, sight, smell, so much here that can be done, including wit as well. And you literally give away the attribute, and so you're left without it. So like if you give an endowment of sight, you are blind until that person that you gave it to dies, and then you get it back. If you give one of metabolism, you kind of go into a stasis mode and don't age, and just kind of go into a stasis and be taken care of. But until they die once again, and then you would, like, even if it's 20 years later, you'd wake up and wouldn't have aged at all. So there's lots of really interesting things. If you give your strength, you'll be very weak, things like that. So it's really an interesting concept, and immediately something that it brought to mind to talk about some of the comparisons is, first of all, it reminded me a bit of a Hemalurgy from Mistborn, and come to find out David Farland actually taught the creative writing class at BYU that Sanderson was in before Sanderson started teaching it later. And so I do wonder if Sanderson had some inspiration, because it's handled really differently, but Hemalurgy in general lets you, that can be done forcibly, of course, but it lets you take allomatic magic or other types of magic, take those abilities from somebody and put them into yourself. Although it's definitely pretty different in the way that it's handled, and it usually involves death of the person that you're doing it to. So works really different, but it kind of made me think about that. Runelords is a bit darker, but it still keeps a lot of things. It kind of the more the style you saw a lot in older fantasy, where it's still, there are things that are mentioned, but you're not going to actually see a lot of the dark things. You have more implications of things, which nowadays it's usually kind of front and center. But the further I got into this series, especially, also reminded me a lot of the Demon Cycle by Peter E. Brett, which is much further on the darker scale. Not so much for the actual magic necessarily, but there are definitely, I wonder if Brett also kind of took inspiration from that. 'Cause once again, his story itself is quite different, but there are a lot of elements that felt very familiar, because we have Gaborn, who's going to be the new Earth King, and he's supposed to save humanity, basically, but then there's somebody else, Raj Aten, who is trying to become the sum of all men in the original title of the first book, because he believes he's the one who's going to save humanity, and specifically it's against the Reavers, which are these creatures that come from underground and fight, and that kind of base idea, which it didn't get it to me immediately. Like, I kind of thought about it a little, but it was later. There was a few more similarities, but that kind of base thing is something that you see in the Demon Cycle as well, where you have somebody who seems to be the prophesized savior, but then you have a rival for that, and they're both wanting to be that person, except they're fighting demons and have wards and stuff. So all of that's pretty different. But it definitely, some of the same notes. And later on in that series, and a bit later in this series too, some of the things they do and that you see definitely felt reminiscent, so it made me wonder as well. So there's kind of your spectrum. You have Sanderson for some of these things that's a more lighter. This is kind of middle, and then you have Demon Cycle, where it goes a lot on the heavy end. But so the idea of the endowments and everything, very interesting, but this is also just one of those super, super high fantasy worlds where we have all kinds of different creatures, and there's so many things that are introduced that just make the world bigger. It's not always even a focus at all. There are in this world these kind of dragon-like things that they have children or really small people ride as messengers, and they're not super relevant to the plot at all. It's just a really cool detail. It's relevant to a certain person for a while, but it's just that's just something so cool, and it's not even like a feature. There's a lot of things like that where we just hear about these things, we find out about it, and it just makes it really, really interesting to see and to do, and all of the different things here. And the Reavers themselves are pretty interesting as a villain, but then there's also some bigger things being set up as well. So you kind of have you have one world in the catastrophe, but then you're setting up a bigger play as well in this first arc, and this kind of deals with the main issue, but there's definitely a ton of stuff to be delved into in the other books as well. Now, I will say too, and that's one thing, because looking at this series, the reviews are pretty mixed and not always the best for some of these books. I think part of that is when you get to the Lair of Bones, which is book 4, and you finish it, it does feel like the end of an arc, but there are so many unanswered questions, so many plot lines that are not really wrapped up. And so if this was, you get to this and you're thinking this is the end, I can absolutely see being disappointed. But from the way that the author has kind of handled things here so far, I'm generally assuming all of those things will come back and be relevant again in the later books. Because from book 1, there were a lot of things that were mentioned and that we don't really deal with until considerably later in the series, because they're relevant, but it's not the big thing right now. So there are a lot of things that are mentioned, talked about, and I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So knowing that this is not the end, I thought it ended the arc really well and really nicely, and you definitely get an ending. There's still a ton that's going to have to happen, though, in the later books, and so I'll be really interested to see where that ends up going. Now, the weird thing, too, about these books is the first 4 books, this whole first arc, takes place for the most part over a couple of weeks, tops. And normally that would be pretty impossible considering how often we're traveling, how many things are going on. But the thing is, once again, going back to those endowments, that makes so many interesting things possible, like fast travel, because you can give strength and stamina and all these kinds of things to people. Well, you can do that with a horse too. And so if you give several endowments of stamina and strength and everything like that to a horse, you know, you can have a horse that's running as fast as a car can go. And so you get to actually see that, and we explore that, you know, the idea of, you know, a horse running, you know, 50 miles an hour, which normally would be completely impossible, but with this, the in-world magic is completely possible. I also like with things like that too, it's mentioned that it's really dangerous to go that fast, because if you need to stop or turn, you're pretty screwed, and you might kill the horse, or yourself for that matter, doing that. But you have things like that, and also when you have endowments of stamina, it kind of takes away the need to even sleep. So we have characters who really don't have to sleep, can travel very quickly, and in some cases even age faster if they have the endowments of metabolism. It allows you to tell a pretty grand story in a very short amount of time. And it's always crazy when you realize how much time has not passed. Normally it's like, oh wow, so much time has passed in the story. No, this is a very, very short amount of time, and there is so much happening, which once again is possible because of the world and the magic system that is set up. And so it's just really, really interesting to see. The big thing I haven't talked about yet so far is the elemental magic, because from the introduction, if you notice, the earth is very important here. Gaborn, I mentioned earlier, is the Earth King, and basically chosen by the Earth to save the Earth and the creatures, basically. So we also have a character, Benisman, who's an Earth Warden, who's featured pretty prominently in here. It is basically like an Earth sorcerer kind of guy. But then we see a little bit less of them than Earth powers, although more here and there as well. There are flame weavers who are like fire sorcerers. There are water sorcerers who often turn into fish and go out to sea and just join the water. And wind also, and that's the one we see probably the least. But also kind of an elemental magic there. So we have this more like advanced magic system that's very much, I would say, a hard magic system with the endowments, because there are a lot of rules around it. There are limits to what the endowments can do. They can't make you, just completely invulnerable. There's still things that can happen to you. You can give yourself all the strength you want, but if your bones can't handle what you're doing or what you're trying to like lift, for example, you're still going to be kind of screwed. So there are actually a lot of rules, and you get to explore that quite a lot throughout, which I found really, really fascinating. So that's more the harder magic, but then you also have the elemental magic, which is much, much softer, because you don't necessarily know what can be done, and often it's the powers behind the elements, basically, that kind of almost decide what you can do and what can happen. So having both of those magic systems, one that feels very classic high fantasy, and one that feels much more modern, despite these being a bit older, it's just really interesting, the combination there. There's other cool things here too, because this is why I wanted to do this video. There's so many things to talk about. We also have a group of people called the Days, and the Days are also referred to sometimes as Time Lords. No, they're not from Gallifrey, I'm sorry to say. But they're a group of people who are observers, and who basically observe the history and everything that's happening with the rulers of the realm. Every ruler has a Days that follows them around. They are sworn to not interfere at all, and they basically, one person is there, and then they have a link with somebody else who's just writing everything that happens, and going from there. So you have this group of people who actually know everything going on with all of the different rulers, and don't want to participate. And I commented too in my review, I was interested to see if we get more. We do get some more of them, but there's still a lot of questions around them, and so I'm also hoping to see a little bit more there. But just another interesting element that does... It doesn't right away seem like it's going to add a ton to the story, but it builds that extra depth to the world, does come in to be relevant later as well, more so when we learn a little bit more about the Days and see different people filling that role and kind of how they're a little bit different. So that's something that's definitely pretty cool. Talking about the Reavers in general, because they are a pretty unique type of creature, and you have a lot of fantasy books. They have like the cannon fodder creature, but Reavers are pretty fearsome all on their own, and like they have their own sorcerers. They communicate through sense, and don't really talk. And they come from, it's called the underworld, but basically just these huge caverns deep beneath the earth is where they live and come. And it's like, trying to fight them is really difficult, and that's why typically you have to be a rune lord to even be able to fight them. And so kind of having that. But we also, we have, I mentioned we have these like dragon type creatures called, I think they're called Grak. I'm drawing a blank right now. We have Frouth giants who are fearsome giants as well. And so we have all kinds of different creatures. We also have, and I'm drawing a blank on the name too. I've been reading too many other things since finishing this last book. We also have these like little people as well who are not quite dwarves. They remind me more of like gully dwarves from Dragonlance than anything, I guess. So maybe you could say gully dwarves. But so it's you get a lot of different types of creatures and things that fill out the world. And like I said, it's interesting to see because so often when you're setting up things like that, everything has to be relevant immediately. And so I know some people will don't appreciate having a bunch of things like that if it's not going to be relevant. A lot of it becomes relevant to one degree or another, but at the same time, I just love world building. And so the world that continues to get built out here is just something that I find just fascinating, and I really enjoy the more we get to learn about the world and see all these different things and just have such a fantastical world to begin with. We've got, like I said, the Reavers who are trying to destroy humanity, but we've got bigger things going on in really, really, really bigger things with like the world and other realms and that kind of thing that are talked about as well. We got the kind of the mythology here is that the people on this planet are like a reflection of the bright world, basically. And so there are creatures who can be called from like the netherworld too, and we see that kind of thing as well. So even some little bits of like summoning greater beings involved in there as well. So there's just a ton there that happens that's really, really fascinating to see. And we get a wide variety of characters here as well, too, because it starts out seeming like we're mostly just going to focus on Gaborn, but we start to get more characters and focus on them, including a guard of his, Borenson, who becomes really relevant. We have a character introduced in the first one, Mirama, who doesn't seem like she's going to necessarily do a lot and becomes very important later on. And we have some other people that come up in later books, and some being careful with what I say to not say too much as well, but get a lot of variety of different characters that you focus on, including the person who starts out as the villain, Rajatan, who goes through a lot of changes as well, and kind of seeing his story is also really interesting. He makes a good foil, but there's just a ton happening in this world that I just find very, very fascinating and really interesting to see. Swinging back to the endowments one more time, because the last thing I want to talk about with that is, I kind of described that, and I glossed over a bit because I was going to talk about other things first, but the idea, once again, of the endowments. And so, lords, kings, people in power usually have many endowments, and it's the idea that how it's explored and the way it's explored is something I really appreciate, because it's one of those things that just sounds like a magic system, but the more you think about it and the more it's explored, the more horrifying it is, because you literally have basically places where you're called a dedicate if you give an endowment, where dedicates are kept, the ones that are like too weak to care for themselves or are blind or can't talk, or like if you give your glamour, you're made to be like hideously ugly, or your metabolism, once again, you're in like a trance, or all of these different things people give away, and then they suffer greatly to give to their lord or their king or whoever. Really gives like a whole new meaning to the idea of doing that, and it's for the most part deemed to be completely normal, and like it's something that people should want to do, to give their endowments for their lord. And so it kind of, like, a lot of times you have in books where they want like soldiers, whether conscripted or not, they're supposed to fight, give their lives for their king or for their lord, and here it's still like very literally that, but in kind of a different way that I haven't seen quite before. And it's just the way, the more you look at it, the more, once again, horrifying it is, because also, when you know that your enemy has all of these endowments that make him stronger and faster and smarter, well, what's the first thing that you're going to probably try to do? Go kill all of those people who are giving their endowments, because it is not necessarily a permanent thing. If you kill the person giving the endowment, they no longer can give you that endowment. They have to stay alive for you to continue getting that power from them, basically. The same way as if you kill the actual rune lord, then all the dedicates will get their attributes back, basically. But just the idea that it's normal in war that you're going to go, assassinate assassinate a bunch of civilians, whether it's women, children, elderly, whoever. Just go kill a bunch of defenseless people, so that then your enemy is more vulnerable. And all of the ways this is done and the way it's presented, at first just seemed me so normal, and then I really appreciated that David Farland in this series really explores the horrifying and kind of dark side of that, and does not shy away from the fact that although this is normal in this world, it is pretty messed up, and you get to see a lot of that. And that exploration of the magic system is also something I really enjoyed, because you don't often get, and there are definitely some other examples, but you don't often get like the exploration of the morality and how necessary your magic system in the books you're writing is. And to me, fascinating, and I loved it. So that is quite a lot about the Runelords series by David Farland. I really enjoyed reading these so far. Going to continue with book 5 probably in May. We're going to take a month off since this is the end of the arc, but I'm really excited to continue and keep going and just see what else is going to happen in this world, because this has been one that I have really enjoyed, and it's just really a lot of interesting concepts and things going on here. So it's been a good read. So if any of that sounded interesting to you, definitely make sure to check out the Runelords by Dave Farland. It's the physical books I've been kind of finding around. Also, Ray Porter does the narration, and you can get the audiobooks, which is mostly how I've been consuming this series on Audible. If you have membership, they're included. So kind of a win right there as well. Really easy to access this series, and one that's definitely enjoyable and worth checking out. So that is really my thoughts on the Runelords, the first arc. I will update, of course, after I finish the second arc and go from there. But that's it for this one, though, so make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the link in the description, as always, for the Wizard Lead to a Discord if you want to chat books, whether these books, other books, really anything at all. It is a lot of fun, and we would love to have you. And, of course, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe.